What's up, vintage moto heads? Bill Wheeler here, Wheelhouse Garage, and welcome to episode 10 of A Bike and a Beer, the show where each Saturday I feature a badass vintage motorcycle and pair it with a cool beer as well. Episode 10. Can you believe we made it this far? Who'd have thought I could do 10 of anything? But against all odds, here we are. And we're showing no signs of stopping. So I got a bunch of cool bikes lined up. Now is the perfect time to subscribe if you haven't already. And if you have, thank you so much. It means the world to me. You guys, look at this. Look at this masterpiece. This is another Dick Mann built. I know, 2 weeks in a row. It's almost too much to handle. It's a Dick Mann built trials bike around a Matchless G80CS. Does it get any better than this? I don't think so. This bike belongs to my dear friend Al Wenzel, who rode it extensively for about 10 years in the early 2000s. Before that, it belonged to my other great buddy, Mr. John Sawaski, and it was supposed to belong to somebody else before that, the person who actually commissioned the build from Dick Mann, but he made an error, and he had the bike pre-sold to somebody else. Mr. Mann caught wind of that and canceled the deal. So I mentioned last episode that Dick built bikes for people as long as they were going to ride them and compete with them. And if you broke that rule, you didn't get a bike. So he's a man of principle, and that's how it went. It's a kind of a fun story there. I chose a cool beer for this bike as well. It's another one from Samuel Smith, which is kind of like my go-to British beer brand. This is an oatmeal stout. I chose it because I feel like stout is a great adjective for a G80CS and a heavyweight trials bike like this. So let's crack this thing open, see if it's any good. I've never had an oatmeal stout before. Hell, I've never even really heard of an oatmeal stout. So hopefully it's pretty tasty. And it is. Surprise, surprise. I'm searching for the oatmeal. Well, I guess it's in there. It's not too strong oatmeal though. It's a good, well, hell, I guess it's a stouty beer. That'll do, pig. Okay, let's dive into this incredible machine. But before we do that, this is a trials bike. If you don't know what trials is a really cool form of competition that's, I mean, you can trace it back over 100 years, but it's still done. There's modern trials that are absolutely crazy what those guys do. But basically, trials is a slow competition. What they do is they line out a really technical course. There could be rocks and roots and really tight turns. And the goal is to make it through the course without going off course, putting your foot down, or crashing or stalling the bike. And in the end, essentially the person with the least amount of dabs or foot touches win. As I mentioned, this bike is of course built by the one and only Dick Mann. I went over Dick Mann in the previous episode, which you can click on up here, but just as a little refresher, Dick Mann's a two-time Grand National champion in the AMA series. He's also a motorcycle Hall of Famer, but he's just an amazing ambassador for the sport. He's a friend to many, and he's just pretty much respected by anyone who ever crossed his path. After his racing career, which spanned 3 decades, the 50s, 60s, and 70s, he got to work building competition bikes for a small but very lucky group of individuals, and this is one of those machines. Matchless is actually a really old British manufacturer, founded in 1899. It was a good old-fashioned family business. A father and his 2 sons, the Collier family. The sons raced in the early 1900s, and they did well. In 31, Matchless bought AJS, and in the vintage world, Matchless and AJS are kind of synonymous. They basically have all the same models, the same bikes essentially, with different badging on them and a little bit different styling. It's called twinning in the industry, and you can actually see it today at companies like KTM and Husqvarna, where essentially they're the same bikes with different bodywork. They were also a pioneer in the British manufacturing world, introducing the telescopic fork in 1941, which they called the teledraulic. And then they produced 80,000 units or so for the war efforts during World War II. And then after that, they kind of got to work making bigger bore singles, and the G80, the 500cc single, was born. A couple years later, they put a rear swing arm on it, and the G80S was born. And then in 1951, the G80CS, which is this motor here, aluminum barrel competition style motor, basically made for the US market, which had a lot of demand for that at the time. That was made. So that's essentially what we have here is a 60. This is a 61 G80CS, and these are amazing motors. They're incredibly reliable, strong, they're robust, they're stout. They're really fun too, and they led a lot of racers to victory in all aspects of motorcycle racing in the 50s and 60s. They're also fantastic motors for trials bike, which our buddy Dick Mann knew well, and that's why he built this machine. And this is actually a trials frame from Matchless as well. Matchless made trial-specific motorcycles. There's a lot of really cool parts on this bike, so let's look at all of them. Starting up front with the wheels, we've got an Akron aluminum rim. This is a Triumph Cub front hub and drum, which are perfect because they're small, lightweight, but they do a really good job at braking, actually. These are Matchless forks, which have a little bit more narrow diameter on the stanchions than the other Matchless models. Same thing, these are Trials triple trees. As I mentioned, that's a Matchless Trials frame, which has a little bit different subframe than the rest of the Matchless frames. High pipe, of course, which you need for trials, and that's a Sammy Miller muffler. This gearbox is a 4-speed gearbox. It's actually an AMC gearbox, which I believe they transitioned from Berman in '56. AMC was the parent company of Matchless and AJS, which they became the parent company in 1938. So it's classic 1 up, 3 down. Works very well. It's actually a standard transmission, but that 64-tooth large rear sprocket makes it all work really well for trials. And this is a Terry Weedy kickstart, which you can see on many of Dick Mann's purpose-built machines. Amel carburetor, newer style with that billet tickler to keep the gas off your finger, and it's got a knob here to control the idle easily. Something that you likely want to do when you're in a trials competition. You might need to adjust that idle a little bit as the bike heats up and you go through the course. NJB rear shocks. This is a really cool and interesting swing arm. Check this out. It's actually 2 pieces. The right side is this swinging arm here, and then there's basically, you know, a large pin that goes through the frame. And then on this side, you have the second piece, which is the swinging arm, and then you drive a pin through there, and that brings it all together. So kind of a unique piece there. Cool primary cover with this neat pinch device here, pinch clamp holding the primary cover on. Center mounted oil tank, built by Dick Mann as well. It's out of the way, and you can see how it's recessed here. I love that kind of stuff. The controls here are fairly standard. They're common across many vintage trials competition bikes. Amel style levers and an Amel T80/200 throttle setup. This is a Wassell seat. Very cool piece there. Classic Dick Mann style rear fender struts with an aluminum rear fender here. And on the rear, we've got another Akron aluminum rim. It's an 18-inch, made in Spain, of course, with this. This is probably the best trials tire you can get. It's a Michelin trial competition tire. K&N air filter. Kickstand here. You want a kickstand when you're doing trials events, especially the first time you go through the course. You need to set the bike there and walk the course. Make a mental plan of how you're going to approach all the obstacles. Very simple, custom-made brake lever on this bike. You can see a lot of the things I mentioned last time about Dick Mann bikes. This paint scheme is you know, a perfect example of Dick Mann styling. These scallops here and the pinstriping. It's magnificent on this alloy tank. Lucas Competition Magneto controlling the spark on this machine, and the timing. So let's talk about the timing. This bike is set up to adjust it on the fly, but let's go ride the bike a bit and talk about that.
So the way you get the most out of this bike in a trial situation is by using everything you have. And on this bike, controlling the timing is a real critical piece. So as you go into a section, maybe it's super tight and kind of level ground, you can retard this timing and the motor will just settle into this really low lug that's just propels you forward at a very comfortable speed, allowing you to focus on manipulation of the handlebars and moving your weight around. And then as you approach something a little more steep, something where you need to let the revs out, you can advance that throttle on the fly. That's why this lever is set up the way it is, and then you can rev it out. Let me show you. Tool for you.
Alright folks, that's going to wrap up episode 10 of A Bike and a Beer. Alan, thank you so much for letting me borrow this masterpiece of a machine. It's an absolute joy to ride and explore. And thank you to everyone watching. Thank you for joining along. Please consider subscribing if you haven't already. And again, if you have, it means the world to me. Thank you so much. We'll be back next week with a whole new bike and an all new beer. Got a really fun lineup, so it's going to be fantastic. Thank you, everyone. Cheers and bottoms up.